my book is Mind, Life, and Universe. The book has a variety of topics ranging from prehistory to human anxiety. It has interviews with different scientists about things they specialize in. I also found some interesting information in the introduction. There were two essential points that I agreed with in the foreword that was written by David Suzuki. The first main point was talking about Rachel Carson's book, Silent Springs. When David Suzuki was reading the book, he took out a message from it, which was that scientists are clever and that they can make amazing compounds such as DDT, but we fail to realize that Earth is not a test tube, growth chamber, or a lab, and that when we bring something from a lab into real life, there are going to be effects we never noticed before. Because everything in this world is connected. For example, when DDT was first invented, it helped out farmers, but it wasn't until that we brought it into real life that we noticed that it affects pests, but it also harmed things like fishes, birds, and even humans. The connections I made to this was the experiment we did in class with the concentration lab, because if we were to conduct this experiment outside, then variables like weather, soil type, or maybe even like when we scientifically change the concentration of the carrot, the life of the organism might decrease. Things like this, like we don't find in the lab, but they take time to be noticed and can make a huge impact on our findings. Now, the second most interesting thing that I found was that if we look at findings from the past, like in 1961, DNA was extremely trending at that time, and we were finding like double helix structure, messenger RNA, and other stuff. But now, when we look at that finding, it's something we learn in high school, and something like some people laugh at it. But we don't notice is that today's findings will most likely be disproved in the future, and that 20 years from now, people might be laughing at our findings. Since my book has a total of 36 different interviews and I can't do them all, I'll choose the three most interesting and talk about them. My first interview will be from Robert Hare, and he talks about psychopaths. Dr. Robert Hare is an expert on psychology, and he talks about what psychopaths are and their characteristics. He describes them as great manipulators and says that many people view them as ingenious and incapable in society, but in fact they are people who can deceive others, and even if someone is an expert in psychology, like Dr. Robert Hare, he can be deceived and fooled by them. Often, psychopaths lack empathy and they don't care about other individuals. They can't put themselves in someone else's shoes emotionally and at times intellectually. A psychopath can enter your brain and try to think your way, but they can't understand how you feel. An analogy that describes this is kind of like a colorblind person. He can't see what the colors are, but he can see the colors. Now, a psychopath is also someone when being interrogated will not confess even when the victim's suffering is brought up. An example that everyone in this class should know about is Jack Wilson. As during this interview, he refused to tell where he buried his dead wife, Polly, even after the officers told him to think about his children and to think about his dead wife and about her parents being so ill from her. He had absolutely no remorse for her wife and didn't seem to care at all. Now, psychopaths are usually developed from the environments, and family stability plays a little role. Things like people you're around mold your personality, and therefore they kind of determine if you're a psychopath or not. Sometimes genetic also play a little role because they affect your characteristics such as lack of fear and anxiety, and things like lack of fear lead to like the fact that they don't fear punishments being the main reason they carry out the actions that they do, because they don't think about what's going to happen to them in the future, rather they just think about what's happening in the present right now. An experiment done in 1984 showed that when psychopaths look at words or see words like murder or rape or hear about them, they portray those words the same way they would portray words like table or chair, because their brain really doesn't know the difference between those words. My second topic is going to be the science behind happiness by scientist Daniel Gilbert. It is obvious that everyone wants to be the happiest they can be. According to Daniel, the only reason our brain is there is so that it can regulate our body rather than just keep us happy. He also believes that we are animals with psychological immune systems, and that once we figure that out, we ask questions on how to trigger it and how to gain more happiness from it. He says that our immune system works best when we have lack of choice in what we can do. Daniel uses the elections as an example. He explains that before the elections, people are not so happy with the other candidate because they obviously want their candidate to win. But as soon as the elections are done and their candidate doesn't win, there's nothing that they can do, and they make excuses for the candidate, saying that, oh, maybe he isn't that bad. This is extremely coincidental because this year's election, many people were saying that they will emigrate to different countries and that the world is doomed if Trump is elected. But once he was elected, people, including myself, were hoping him to be better, and seeing that he's already backing away from many of his policies and trying to look at his good rather than his bad. A famous question that Daniel addresses is, does money buy happiness? And I think Daniel Gilbert does an excellent job explaining this, as he says that money doesn't always buy happiness. He elaborates by saying that going from poverty to middle class, money does buy happiness, but if we go from middle class to upper class, it doesn't. The reason for this is that he says that money buys happiness when it gives you the necessities to life, such as safety, food, clean water, and other things like that. But when you already have those needs, more money doesn't really do anything. And he says that he'd rather have a strong social relationship between different people, and that's more likely to keep you happy than wealth would, because he explains that wealth is kind of a curse. At times, it can give you false happiness because you think that you're going to be more happy than other people when you have like 10 times more money than them, but instead it kind of just ruins with your psychological system and makes you more sad than you would even if you never had that money in the first place. The last topic is about the brain and its perceptions by Richard Gregory. Usually the eyes correspond objects in a way that is not always true in real life. For example, if we look at a table, we might sense that it is strong and solid, but that is because our brain is just guessing that, and we are not like sure about that until we actually feel the table. However, at the same time, it is incredible that we can go from a little image to a sense of reality, because as soon as we look at that table, we can feel that the table is strong and solid. Another interesting point was that all the colors that we see are not actually in the universe. Rather, they are just an image created by the brain. So if we were to look at a red carpet, that is just because our brain is perceiving it in that way. Richard Gregory states that if there weren't any mirrors, it wouldn't be possible to understand our own facial expressions. And as babies or children, we can recognize ourselves in our mirror due to the movement and not by actually recognizing our own face. We also wouldn't be able to conclude other people's expressions due to their feelings, such as them being mad or sad and so on, because we wouldn't have any real life experience with expressions since we can't see anything of our own expressions in the mirror. The only animal other than the human being that is able to recognize itself in a mirror is a chimpanzee, and all other animals it is impossible for them to recognize themselves in a mirror. Gregory also believes that without touch, we won't be able to learn anything, because as children, we learn by touching so that we can recognize objects around us, and that sight is just derived from the fact that we can touch. Richard Gregory also talks about what he thinks are the similarities between magic and science, as he says that science is in a way was born with magic. For example, back when we never had an explanation for anything, for everything, such as storms or other things, we used to say that storms were created by the fury of God. And now, since we have a scientific explanation for it, we don't have that same conclusion. He also believes that everything in the universe is just a dream and an illusion. He believes that the reality of perception is physics. Everything is physics. The physics of touching, picking up objects, and so on.